It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Hey, Kate, it's April. Lots of showers and another show. Tell us what's on this month.
Well, no fools for this April, Nigel. We've got a packed show. Joe Cook, who many viewers will recognise as editor of Training Journal, is talking to us about their new L&D report, which is revealing key barriers and calls for a shift towards performance, 100% behind that, experimentation and real organisational impact. Sounds excellent. Looking forward to that one. I spoke to Alex McCann, founder of an exciting new startup, Rumbo, which is an AI career platform. And it's great. He's very young. He's very dynamic. And I think it's great to see somebody of that younger age leaning into some of the career challenges.
A bit like you, Kate. A bit like you.
Yeah, once upon a time, Nigel, once upon a time. So that's great with Alex. Andy Lancaster returns in his series with us. This month, he's looking at unlearning with Stella Collins and looking at the rewiring of thinking. So replacing outdated habits through practice, environment, and support. And actually, only last week, I was having a conversation with someone about unlearning. So that's very, very timely for me. And then, of course, Rob Clark joins us to bring us the latest on the learning sector. This month, he contends that AI and model context protocol are transforming digital learning. I would agree. Merging platforms and workflows while forcing vendors to prove value and improve real performance outcomes, which I'm definitely seeing play out from my perspective. So packed show, enjoy it, and we'll see you on the other side.
Yes, enjoy the show. I'm very happy today to talk to Joe Cook, the editor of the Training Journal. And what has brought us together is to focus our conversation a little bit on a new report called the TJ L&D Influence Report 2026. Hot off the press. And it emerged out of the 60th anniversary conference. So tell me, Joe, straight off, how did it come about and what is the genus of the report?
So we were putting all of this time and effort and energy and, quite frankly, money into the TJ conference. And these kind of events are always amazing one way or another, whichever way you slice and dice it. But then it's usually just a one-day thing. And with the design of the conference, I wanted people to be able to take away actions and imperative, which they did. But also I wanted something else to come out of it, to say, well, hey, look, we had all these discussions. I asked you all these questions. And look, here's something to have evidence of the great conversations and the great advice we were sharing amongst ourselves.
Yeah, and it kind of captures that in a way, because you've got a number of features. One is that you've done a quantitative survey, but you're also gathering together qualitative statements by the community. And you end up with 60 of those, which are exhortations, thoughts, discussion points. Really good. I found those very, very helpful. So tell me about the highlights for you. What were your 3 highlights in the report?
Oh, you've limited me to 3. That's horrid. Well, I think one has to be those 60 things that you just mentioned, their
Yes.
ideas, their questions, their imperatives.
Yes.
Because we had a lot of L&D expertise and experience in the room on that day. And I wanted to capture beyond the one day. So I asked a number of different questions, things like, well, what conversations do L&D need to have with their organization to increase our impact? What are the best conditions we need for learning? what would be a bold move for L&D to do in 2026 and others. And so capturing and then kind of curating those together has given lots of different people things to think about. And that could be like, yep, I know it. Yes, I know it. I should do that better. And others will have one or two things that really strike a chord with them.
Yeah.
And I think always coming away from something going, I'm trying to do the right thing and I'm working in the right area is always really positive, as well as their new ideas and different ways to think about things.
Yeah, and you've also dotted them throughout the report, which I think is really good. I think if you just put 60 right at the front or right at the back, people wouldn't have read them. But as they go through, they kind of draw your eye because they're in bold. And you pick them up and then you move on to the next bit, and then you pick them up and you move on to the next bit. So it's a nicely structured report, I think.
Thank you. And I thought they linked the sections together quite nicely as well.
Indeed they do it. It kind of it's like the sewing thread that pulls the whole thing together, so it doesn't come unstuck. I agree with you. What else? Any other highlights?
So it was also the TJ Readiness Enablers Index, and this was really
Yes.
a key part for me of the day that we had, because there was a lot of talk around the business focus, around aligning with the business and making sure that you were focusing on organizational impacts and not bums on seats and all of those conversations that we have. So the Readiness Enablers Index looked at kind of asking just 4 questions, basically. There's 4 versions of what's getting in your way to do good stuff. I worded it slightly differently, but that's the essence. And what came out of that was that the absolute biggest barrier that people had to doing good work in L&D was access to decision makers about
Yes.
strategy, budget, and
Yes.
priorities. There are other barriers, and they were all important to different people, but that was a really obvious big thing in the way for people.
Yeah, I think so. 4 are good. Again, I think if you'd have had 20 enablers, that's not going to work if you just have 1. But the 4 are access to decision makers, access to usable data. And I think that's, again, I find that really important. If every single person who reads this report goes back and starts to look for data that they have to create it, data that's there that they can get hold of, that they can process. I thought you can get some big insights from that. Time and permission to experiment, incredibly important. If you're not experimenting, or you're terrified of failing, or you don't have any time to do anything apart from straight down the middle, straight down the middle, straight down the middle, you're never going to have an exciting operation. And lastly, tools, processes and support to implement and scale. And again, tools are tools. They're fantastically important, but we've kind of got lost a little bit with AI. We just focus on the tools, not on what it actually does,
Yeah.
and why you're using the tools. It's just,
Yeah.
let's grab a tool. And if you went to, if you go to the exhibition at training, learning and training and learning technology, I'm getting my words muddled up. If you go to the exhibition at Learning Technology this year, you will be told by 10,000 suppliers of tools. That's all you need, just the tool. Whereas what you're saying is that it's processes that need to
Yeah.
be put in place.
And it was really tempting to separate tools and processes. I really wanted to do that. But with the essence of wanting to keep it a little bit more simple and a little bit more structured, often tools and processes go together, often they don't. And this report also doesn't specifically dive into more deep AI stuff. It's mentioned in there, it's part of the land we live in these days, but it's not an AI report. So I didn't focus heavily on that. But I looked at it as, well, AI is in everything we do now. And yes, we can separate that out as a topic and focus on it, which we should absolutely do in different things. But this was much more about, how do you do what you do and how can you make that better for the organization and for the people? And for most people, the tools and the processes weren't really the biggest barriers. It's like, well, I've got whatever I've got, software wise, AI wise, documentation and process wise. They're not the biggest issues. The other issues are, like you say, the time, the data, and the access to decision makers. So if those things aren't there, then the tool won't matter by the time you get to it. You can have the best thing in the world, but if somebody hasn't said, this is your budget, this is the organizational priority, and come to me when you need me, then it's going to be very difficult to make it the impact that we want to.
Yeah, or you don't have time to try something out and experiment and try 3 or 4 things and hope that 1 or 2 of them work. Yeah, you're 100% right. And tools are very attractive because it's doing something. You buy a tool, but the difference between buying a tool and actually having some impact is a very big long road. And my
Yeah.
belief about AI is that in a year's time we won't even talk about it because it's just going to be there. It's in the back. We're focused on what it does, not what it is. And
I
we're
don't know that we
still
won't talk about it. I would challenge you on that one, Nigel, but I agree that it will become much more business as usual. And that's a
yeah.
little bit of how I've treated it in this report too.
Yes, and I think you're right. Well, I sadly I remember the IT revolution when everyone talked about the PC on your desk, what it's going to do, and all the transformation, and it can do this, and then all of a sudden you don't even think about it because it's just what we do. It's there, and I think
Like
AI would just
like
be
the
there.
late 90s, the word e-commerce was everywhere. And if you hear
Yes,
somebody say the word e-commerce these days, it's like, whew, you're dusting off that word. Wow. Where'd
exactly.
that
It's a
come from?
joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that I really liked about the report is this idea of moving to enabling performance, not shoveling out content. And I think if you have that frame, enabling performance, then you can put anything in front of it,
Phew.
tools that,
Yeah.
AI that, you end up moving in the right direction. If you
Yeah.
start in any other place, then you don't end up in such a good space, I
And that
feel.
can include creating, developing, and delivering
Of
really
course
good
it can,
content.
because
Yeah,
you're enabling performance. Yeah, but you don't
absolutely. And
start
I
with
did
that.
that
You
too in
start
my
with
own work.
performance. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely it does. But it has to come back to, well, what do we want people to do? You know, all of that stuff around things like Kathy Moore's action mapping, about Nigel
Yes.
Harrison's performance consulting, they're the things to do first. And that's the other thing that I'm really proud of, and I hope has come across in this report, is I wanted it to be bold. And I've got a lot of that from Laura Overton. She's imbued this word bold into me over the years,
Mm.
but also wanted it to be positive framing, not toxically positive. I didn't want it to be L&D bashing. I wanted it to acknowledge the challenges that we have, acknowledge some places aren't doing it very well and are behind the curve. Some places are ahead. What can we learn from them? But to just look at it and go, okay, what's the challenge? And now what do we do? Let's roll up our sleeves and let's get on with it because this is exciting and it's important. So let's have a go at that rather than, oh, it's hard. And it's like, yeah, it
Yes.
is hard, but let's get on with it. Let's do something.
Yes, I think saying everything's wonderful is completely misleading, but also saying you're all useless is too difficult. It's far too much to do. Give up is not going to be helpful.
Because
It's a,
even if you're at that end of the scale, then there's no point being negative about it. You
no,
have to
get on with
acknowledge
it.
reality.
Yeah.
But then go, okay, so what needs to change? What's within our sphere of influence?
Mm,
What's within our control? And
yeah.
that's largely what this report is about, is looking at, well, what is that? What are the blockers? And how can I get that extra little bit that I need?
And I can't believe that if someone went through those 60 questions, that obviously all 60 are not relevant, but they pick 3 or 4 and they
Mm,
become stretch targets. If they say,
yeah,
well, we could do this, that's doable. We could accommodate that, or we need this question to answer, or we need to approach leadership with this kind of point. I
yeah.
think you're setting an agenda, which is a very valuable agenda.
Thank
And
you.
I hope things happen as a result of it because
So do
it's
I.
there, it's free, and we put a crawl on the screen to let people download it. So please read this report. It's not a big, long report, but it's got some real meat in it, I think. So, Joe, just one final question. What next? What next for TJ? What next for Joe Cook? What next for this report?
Well, there's some big questions. I'll focus on the report first of all, is that I'd love people to download it, let me know what they find useful in there, if anything that is relevant to them. But also, I'm aware that qualitatively, the number of people in the report that I've got the
Sample size
database
is
of,
small. Yes,
yeah,
it's true.
it's a
Mm,
little bit small. So it
yeah.
could be do with beefing up.
Mm,
And that's what's next. So hit up trainingjournal.com. You'll find there's a link there to fill in the survey. And it's asking those readiness enablers questions. You can do it anytime you want. You can slice and dice it on a team or a contract or whatever a project that you're working on. And I just like some much bigger data sample so that later in the year I can revisit this topic and say, okay, a bigger sample of people, and guess what? The story's the same, or it's different, and get some other insights.
yeah. And what about Training Journal? Just give me a couple of seconds on the Joe Cook vision for Training Journal. Where do you think it will go in the next year or two? Or the next 5 years? You'd probably be doing it for 5 years at least.
Well, I think I'm on year 3, and we're going from strength to strength. We've had some internal changes last year, which have worked out really well. We had our 60th anniversary conference last year, and this is going to be exclusive for you, Nigel, is that we will absolutely be having another conference this year. So keep an eye out on TJ socials for when that gets announced.
So, Joe Cook, I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me, sharing a really good report and giving us a little bit of the frame and the background and the context, because that's always insightful. And good luck with TJ. I hope it goes from strength to strength under your inspired guidance, I think would be my final 2 words. Inspired
Thank you
guidance.
so much. That's really kind of you.
Rob Clark's here with Learning News. He's bringing you the monthly roundup of the hot stuff going on in L&D.
The digital learning market is entering a more complex phase, according to the latest research from Fosway. Model Context Protocol is a new AI standard which can help connect learning systems to workflows. We'll explain all about it. The Evidence Informed Practice Conference is coming up next month. Organiser Tom McDowell is here with a preview. The digital learning market continues to evolve under pressure. Budgets remain tight, scrutiny on value is increasing, and vendors are having to work harder to differentiate in a crowded and fast-changing landscape. AI is moving from experimentation to application. It's accelerating content production, changing how learning is delivered, and starting to challenge long-standing assumptions about what providers do and where value sits. Traditional categories are becoming less useful, and the lines between platforms, content and services are blurring. Yet some fundamentals remain. The need to build skills at scale is growing. Learning together still matters, and areas like coaching, cohort learning and compliance are being reworked with new approaches.
The switch from classroom activity to digital has been a driver of the market year on year. So even when the economy is harder, digital learning tended to sort of rise on the basis of that sort of switch of budgets from the classroom to digital. That equation seems to have no longer hold true, really. Vendors are focusing even further on how they demonstrate and help customers make the case. How can they bring data and evidence to that process? Most vendors talked of some kind of strategic change, whether that's a complete pivot or an addition of a new service line or a new product, or adding new capabilities to seek greater value, stronger customer relationships, deeper relationships, etc. So I think we've really started to see that play out now. So innovation is being applied to a tight market and sort of expanding that kind of strategic choices from vendors. Most learning systems providers are now adding content capability through generative AI tools, either to sort of authoring, adding authoring capability, building or partnering for content services. So we've seen that on the platform side in digital learning as well, but that's going the other way. So we've seen off-the-shelf providers, off-the-shelf content library services, and maybe aggregators are adding content capabilities. So we've seen the sort of blurring of boundaries. The synthetic media providers are getting more involved with authoring. Authoring providers are adding synthetic media capabilities. So all of this is happening at the same time. What you're seeing is from a buyer's point of view, where you might have seen a particular specialism as a strong guide of where to go with your next supplier choice. Customers are having to work a little bit harder. And on the marketing side, vendors are having to work even harder, I think, to make it clear what they want to take to market and how that's useful and different as well. And I think that's a really difficult marketing challenge at the moment.
Model Context Protocol is a new standard for connecting AI with software tools, systems and data. Instead of AI operating in isolation, Model Context Protocol allows it to access real business content, documents, applications, processes, and APIs. For workplace learning teams, this opens the possibility for AI to securely interact with learning platforms, content libraries, and organisational knowledge, potentially fundamentally changing how learning needs are understood and met. And this raises a wider question. If AI can connect directly to organisational workflows, learning can take place there too, rather than in standalone training experiences. Model Context Protocol is gaining attention among AI engineers and analysts, but it's early days for most learning and development professionals. To explore Model Context Protocol and why it matters for the learning technology market, I'm joined by Frankie Woodhead, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Thrive, which has begun MCP testing.
Ultimately, this is the emerging standard for how AI tools kind of coexist and operate in today's world. At a very simple level, it makes integration between either agents, OpenAI, Claude, and how they can talk to other systems without having to do every single integration. So it's a natural language way for systems to interact. But for businesses like Thrive, it's how we can expose the Thrive interfaces to our customer agents or for our customers as well. Where we're kind of seeing this emerging today is, imagine you're an L&D administrator. You're administrating learning for thousands of individuals. Today, that could involve kind of heavy administrative efforts. You're creating content, you're reviewing your compliance, you're sharing information with a number of people. Imagine a world where you can say, please retrieve all of the content that hasn't been viewed in the last 2 years, or all content that is receiving a 1 out of 5 rating. And the agent can go and do that work for you, recover and bring that information, and you're just doing it through natural language. Secondly, a lot of our customers, we want to be where they're learning. So whether that's in Copilot or that's in their own kind of agentic area, they want to be able to retrieve information from Thrive without necessarily needing to go there. Firstly, it provides the ability to utilize AI tooling and apply them changes or retrieve information from Thrive. Secondly, it allows us to be exactly where our users and our learners are as well. I see this been applied to the learner experience. I see this been applied to the L&D admin experience. I really do see this being the future of how colleagues and users will interact with platforms where absolutely they are.
A growing theme in workplace learning is the gap between well-designed learning and actual performance change. The Evidence Informed Practice Conference 2026, taking place in Birmingham this May, is about that challenge. It connects insights from psychology, neuro and behavioural science with the day-to-day realities of organisational performance, and asks why learning interventions can sometimes fail to deliver lasting impact, even when they appear engaging and well-designed.
The whole idea behind evidence-informed practice is that we bring together our professional experience, our contextual understanding of our audience and our organisation, and the wealth of scientific research that's out there. We're very good at 2 of those things in our industry. We bring a lot of understanding of our organisations and the people we work for. We bring a lot of professional experience, but I speak to a lot of people who, not for lack of trying, struggle to bring in the scientific research. And that struggle, in my observation, comes from a couple of things. The first is fear of getting it wrong. For a lot of us, this is not a natural part of our wheelhouse. We don't come from science backgrounds. A lot of people in L&D, HR, and leadership positions, for want of a better term, fell into that role or found that role along the way. Another thing is some of this stuff is complicated. It's not totally simple, and we don't always have the skills to translate from research paper into a practical insight. But luckily, in our industry and around our industry, there are brilliant communicators who can do that bridging for us, and that's really what this event is about. It's about building bridges between L&D practitioners and leaders, people working in HR, and leaders interested in performance enablement with the people who bring that scientific understanding that will empower us to do better and more impactful work.
That's Learning News this April. Thank you as always to our programme sponsor CLO 100 for its support with our programmes. Next time we'll have all of the news from the Learning Technologies event in London. For now, that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching.
has sprung here in the UK, and at Learning Now TV, we're always keen to nurture the green shoots of industry. We're thrilled this month to be joined by a founder of a new startup. Alex McCann was introduced to me by a friend of mine a couple of months ago, actually. Time flies. And he is building something called Rumbo, which is really exciting. We'll get into it as we go through the interview. Now, Alex, there's a sort of a series of things, frustrations, observations, general trends that are sort of giving you your why in terms of what you're trying to solve for and why you're trying to do it. And again, without wishing to make myself sound really old, some of them are kind of quite generational specific, or things that you've noticed amongst, people at your age and stage of career. So welcome to the show. And can you give us a little bit of sort of background around, what you were doing and sort of what your journey's been to this point?
Yeah. So I think that there's a personal angle for me. My journey to where I am now has been very non-linear. I've had multiple pivots already. And the advice that I got along the way felt a little bit lackluster through school and university. I didn't feel like I was getting the support that I needed through those pivots. And since then I've had kind of professional help from a career coach, and just noticed the kind of contrast between that experience and the experience that most people have at school and university. And so that was one of the key drivers for the creation of this platform, is how can we kind of make quality careers advice scalable through tech. And then the kind of broader, I suppose, societal problem is that for my generation especially, but actually for all across the board, I think that there's this real kind of epidemic of meaninglessness. A lot of people feeling really unfulfilled at work and generally frustrated. And I think there's so many reasons for this, but I think one of the big ones is that the previous paths that were kind of on offer, the traditional corporate ladder and the steady career progression, the predictable career progression, I don't think that that's an option anymore for my generation, at least. And I think that that's led people to start questioning, okay, if the path isn't already laid out for me, what do I do? And it's led to a lot of people feeling really quite lost. And so, everything we're doing is essentially trying to help people rethink traditional career advice and help them engage with more meaningful and aligned work.
Amazing. And obviously the parallel trend to that is the ability to harness AI technology to be able to build and create faster. We're seeing, certainly in the learning space and the ed tech space, we're seeing sort of new providers pop up all the time. Something that, I'm constantly trying to keep an eye on, and it's a real challenge. It takes up my days, no problem. And so I guess that gave you had the motive, if you like, but also the opportunity to be able to build relatively quickly and cost effectively.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting time to be able to build. And, I'm like you, trying to keep up to date with what's going on. And it seems like every day there's something new, some kind of new development, startups popping up here and there. I think what was really exciting for us in the early stages is kind of going out with this hypothesis that, like really recently, the tech has got to a point where it can do some of the work, or it has some of the capabilities of the coaches that I worked with, and I'm not saying that the tech is quite up to the human standard, that there are certain things that still require a human touch, but a lot of the kind of market research, the data analysis, all of these things, I think really recently it's got to a point where we can actually make meaningful progress in this context. And yeah, just how quickly you're able to build stuff now. It's fascinating. It's really, really exciting. I've really enjoyed the process thus far.
Yeah, and you've bootstrapped it all, right? So that's really exciting as well. That somebody, at your age and stage, again, making myself sound old, but that you're able to do that. I mean, I've been there myself many years ago, but that involved kind of angel investment and developers, and that feels like a million years ago in tech terms. So tell me a little bit about Rumbo and what it is and what it does, and how you're applying it to fix this problem.
Yeah, so my observation has been that in an attempt to try and solve this kind of this epidemic of meaninglessness and the job dissatisfaction um, at the moment, I see that a lot of people have really focused on tactical solutions. It's a lot of tools that enable CV optimization, LinkedIn optimization, interview prep, all of those kind of things, which I think are still really important. But it's our belief that tactics should follow strategy, and not enough attention has been placed on the importance of strategy in making really important career decisions. It's something that what you choose to do with your life and career is one of, if not the biggest decision that you have to make, and people go into it with such little data. And we want to change that. We want to help people go through the process of understanding themselves, their passions and interests, their skills and capabilities, and the kind of market reality. So understanding what's out there in terms of the industries that they're interested in working in, where are the growing sectors, where are the market gaps that somebody with your specific kind of genetic makeup experience can address. And so we're trying to help people move from a position of confusion, uncertainty, to a place where they've got some things that they can test. They're getting more data about themselves. They're going into this decision-making process more well-informed. And so, yeah, you've got these kind of reports and assessments that build a profile around you. And then we have Maya, who's the chatbot that you can essentially book kind of career coaching sessions with, the same way that you would a professional career coach, and walk through some of the issues that you're facing, some of the doubts that you have, maybe some of the insights generated through the reports. And then you have this kind of career strategy document, which gives you experiments, things that you need to test, assumptions to test, people to reach out to, companies that it's worth researching, all of that kind of stuff. So rather than just kind of, here's a 20-minute assessment, off you go, and then we'll give you some jobs that might match somebody with your profile, it's a little bit more holistic, and we hope it's something that people keep coming back to.
Well, it's not a silver bullet. So I went through the kind of the initial assessment process because you kindly gave me access. And, one of the things that I firmly believe is that reflection is a key part of any learning process and any problem solving process. And it wasn't just click, 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 answer, answer, answer. It was, it did force me to stop and think about what I was inputting. I really enjoyed the way the questions were phrased, the fact that they didn't just feel sort of, cookie cutter. But I think the other thing that strikes me as well about the process is, you said you had access to some career coaching. I've been fortunate enough to have that in my career, but it's quite expensive, right? It's quite rarefied. So what the sort of the democratization and the access to something like this at scale for anybody with less means, it is really, really important, I think. And it's really, I think that's the exciting bit for me is, it isn't just, like I say, oh, here's a list of jobs. Because that's kind of what I got when I was at school, right? Was just like, oh, there you go. 4,000 years ago, obviously. But, that access, it feels like it's very inclusive, I suppose, is a long-winded way of saying it.
Yeah, no, that was the intention. And the idea came about while I was, so I was actually traveling with a big group of friends of mine who had all quit their jobs to go traveling. And I was I was still working. So I was doing the whole kind of digital nomad thing. And yeah, it just kind of occurred to me as I was watching them try and figure out, what were they going to do when they got back, and start applying to jobs, I don't know, how ineffective the current systems are. This kind of approach where you just apply to 400 different jobs and you're not really excited by any of them. They're all just kind of things that, somebody with your degree might apply to. And I just thought this is just such a ineffective way of finding meaningful work. But the issue is these are all people that didn't have a job. Not everybody has, savings or people's capability to take risks at different points in their lives as well. And so I kind of recognize, I was really lucky to be in a position where I could get career coaching and invest in myself that way. But I just thought, it's such a shame that the majority of people, the best, the highest level of career advice they get is at school and university, and a lot of the time it's just a kind of tick box exercise, or it's overlooked. And I should point out as well, it's not for the fault of the careers advisors at schools or universities. I think that they're all great and they're great at their jobs. I just think it's a question of scale. There's a lot of students and not that many advisors, and so it's hard to give them the quality that they deserve.
It's also a system in transition and being disrupted, right? Higher education, further education is going to be, changed and disrupted, and is going to have to evolve, significantly. There's a lot of talk in corporate world around early careers, industries like legal, where, consulting traditionally, where they've, hired bright young things out of university to kind of do the legwork, but now Claude or Gemini or whatever can do some of that legwork. But how do you build your pipeline, your talent pipeline, and your succession pipeline, for the next generation coming through? So I think that the application to education is an obvious one, but I think from a corporate perspective, a lot of our viewers will be sitting within corporate organizations or large scale, public sector type organizations. That early careers piece is really exciting. But, I'm 46 and I found it really useful, right, to sit down and go through. So prompting that sort of reflective exercise and having a variety of different outcomes as well was really exciting. So by the time people watch this, you'll be live. So I got a beta. I was very lucky to get a beta access. So we're going to provide some details where people can go and find out more information. But how can people kind of follow? Because you went viral recently as well, right? With a piece that you wrote.
Yeah. So you can find me at Still Wondering on Substack. That's my newsletter, where I explore some of these themes as I'm learning more about the problems. And then on LinkedIn, we're Rumbo on LinkedIn, and Alex McCann as well. So yeah, check me out there.
Wonderful. He's got quite the follow on LinkedIn as well. So do go and check Alex out. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us and share, your new baby, freshly baked.
Yeah.
But yeah, stay tuned and look out for Rumbo. Definitely give it a go. Like I said, I found it a very useful, reflective exercise, and I can see an absolute ton of application for it. So you'll have to come back in a few months and tell us how that world domination is going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Alex.
Cheers.
Up next, Andy Lancaster returns with his Learning Lens series. And this month, he's talking to Stella Collins, friend of the show, about unlearning. There's very little Stella doesn't know about the brain and how we learn. So really excited to see this segment.
What if the biggest thing holding us back isn't what we don't know, but what we're absolutely certain of? As learning professionals, we're wired to value new skills, fresh knowledge, and constant growth. And our role often seems clear: to help people add more, know more, and do more. But what if real progress isn't about adding at all? What if it's about letting go, because sometimes the things that once drove our success now become the very things that limit our progress. Hi, I'm Andy Lancaster, Chief Learning Officer and Consultant at Reimagine People Development. And this is the Learning Lens, where we explore what the evidence says about people development and how we lead learning. And today we're diving into a powerful and slightly uncomfortable idea, unlearning. It's become a bit of a buzzword in L&D circles. Now, the world moves fast, the context shifts, the evidence evolves, and yet our thinking often stays comfortably fixed. So unlearning isn't about erasing what you know, it's about having the courage to question it. So is this theory still useful? Does this belief still serve us? Is this even true anymore? And it begins the moment we realise we might be wrong or simply outdated. And when we let go of what no longer fits, we create space for sharper thinking, better decisions, and real growth. Now, there's a body of research positioning unlearning in L&D practice, and we've linked key references in the show notes. But here are 5 key lines of thinking. First, L&D teams need to help organisations to stop doing what no longer works, letting go of outdated practices, targets, and habits. Secondly, L&D teams need to create the space to question the way we do things, building environments where assumptions can be challenged. Thirdly, L&D teams need to align unlearning to performance, because if KPIs and goals still reward old behaviours, then unlearning won't stick. Fourthly, L&D teams need to embed unlearning in everyday work, designing learning around real workflows, not just workshops. And finally, L&D teams must help foster psychological safety for people to question approaches safely. So in this session, we're going to delve deeply into the concept of unlearning. So I guess the question is, are you ready to unlearn? So the interesting question we're going to explore in this learning lens is it actually possible to unlearn? And to do that, I'm joined by Stella Collins, an experienced learning practitioner working at the intersection of people development, neuroscience, impact, and technology. Stella's someone I really value as part of my network. Now, Stella's the author of the widely acclaimed Neuroscience for Learning and Development, now in its 3rd edition, and is about to publish a new title on self-directed learning. So Stella, welcome to the Learning Lens. So let's get into the concept of unlearning from a neuroscience perspective, not just what the kind of the rumour has around this one and how this helps L&D teams. So let's start by thinking, when people actually talk about unlearning, what's actually happening in the brain? And are we deleting knowledge, or is something else going on?
So we're really not deleting knowledge. What we're trying to do is create stronger pathways for new stuff we're learning, whether that's knowledge or skills. And I think it's important to draw the distinction, but the process is very much the same. So at a physiological level, what you're doing is you're trying to create a new pathway that becomes stronger and more likely to be initiated than the previous pathway you had. That still exists. It's always going to exist. In fact, it seems to be that when you learn something, when you're trying to revise a habit or trying to learn a new strategy for doing something, you have your original I mean, this is quite weird, but you have kind of like 3 phases. You've got the original unlearned thing, you've got the thing you learned originally, and then on top of that, you've got this new network, which is the new thing you're wanting to do.
So then in some ways, the concept of unlearning actually is not true, because the neural pathways always exist. So when as learning practitioners, we're talking about unlearning, what we're actually talking about is rewiring. Is that a better phrase to use?
Yes, it's setting up new connections, and you can build on the connections you've already got. That obviously helps to some degree, but you're effectively building new connections. So you're rewiring. Yeah. So
I think that's an important distinction for us to make, because I know I've been at conferences where we've thrown this term, we need to unlearn more. So it's a really, from a neuroscience point of view, that's a really important starting point from evidence base, is that it is about new pathways, not forgetting stuff or erasing stuff completely. So that's really helpful. So I guess my next question is, if old pathways don't disappear, which they don't, what does that mean for why habits resurface? And I know this in my own situation, that things do keep cropping up again, particularly under stress. And I was just sort of thinking, how much is this about the individual or maybe the environment around people which causes those habits to resurface?
So I think it's on three different levels. You've got the neural level, what's happening at that level. We talked about that. You've got the behavioral level, which is what do you actually do when you do something new. And then you've got the systems or the environmental level, which is what creates the triggers, often for the behaviors that set off these neural pathways. So I can give you an example, Andy, of me moving to Europe, which I did 8 years ago. When I first moved to Europe, I was very good at crossing roads in Britain. I knew to look right, left, right again. You know, I'd done that for 50 years. I was really good at it. I first arrived in Europe, and the cues are similar, you know, a road, but my behaviours now become really different, because if I stick to my old behaviour, I'm going to be squished. So now I know I have to look in a different direction, but I don't know which direction it is. I'm just very confused, thinking, oh my God, which direction am I going to look in? And for a long time, I have to use quite a lot of cognitive effort when I come to a road to think, no, I have to look left and then right and then left again. And every time I go back to the UK, you know, I switch straight back into right, left, and you know, I'm safe. Right, left, right, and I'm safe. After 8 years of living in Europe, I have realised that I've become quite good at doing the European way of crossing roads, and I can do it instinctively without having to think about it now. So when I go back to the UK, sometimes for about half a day, I'll choose the European method of road crossing, which tends to mean, again, I go back into confusion because I'm thinking, don't get run down. What tends to happen very quickly, though, as soon as I'm back in the UK, is that I very quickly pick up my old habit. So I now have two options for my behaviours triggered by the external environment. And I think what I'm now doing is looking more carefully at the cues. So, you know, is it a tarmac road? I'm probably in the UK. Is it cobbles? I'm probably in Europe. And listening out for different cues is helping me, looking for different cues is helping me choose the appropriate behaviour. Both behaviours are there. Both are now reinforced. And now it's an unconscious choice. I now do it unconsciously. But as soon as I get back to Belgium for a couple of days or hours, I'll switch into British mode and vice versa. So it's about having all those levels are still there. I haven't unlearned how to cross the road in the UK. I've just learned a different way to do it, which I can now access easily.
And that's really important for us. You know, I know you and I would want to think holistically and systemically within learning practice. But this is why just creating a course or an intervention is not going to change this, is it? I mean, we're actually talking about a wider organisational understanding for someone, if we want to use the term unlearn or rewire. This is about systemic factors. I guess that's what you're helping us to understand there.
Yeah, I think it's the systemic factors that are really important. So trying to run a course that is, you know, about awareness raising might be really fascinating for people, but the chances are they will go straight back into work and do the same thing. I was running a leadership course last week, and one of the things we talked about was feedback, and we were trying to get these leaders to shift the way they think about giving feedback. So we gave them lots of practice on giving feedback, but what we need is for them to go back into the workplace now and create new cues for themselves in terms of giving feedback, you know, connect it more to coaching rather than telling, for instance. Now, one of the things that could really jeopardize that is if their manager gives them feedback and their manager gives them feedback that is, you know, unhelpful and unuseful, or they're trying to give feedback under stress, under pressure, when they will revert to their old habits. So it's about trying to create conditions within the workplace. You know, it might be putting up new notices, it might be removing old cues. It's about how can you build that in the workplace, and how can you get people to practice long enough and hard enough to put those new procedures into place.
Which is exactly what comes back to your crossing the road. And incidentally, I nearly got run over in Amsterdam for exactly that. So if we think about, this is about a wider context for us as learning professionals, and what maybe L&D teams maybe get wrong is over reliance on awareness training. So some tips. What I mean, I think one you've kind of mentioned there is the role of managers in this to reinforce change. So any particular tips that you'd give folks listening into this to say, if you're really thinking about unlearning and changing behaviour, these are some of the things you've really got to look out for?
So I think check the environment. Are the cues that are helping people, that are going to trigger people back into their previous behaviours? Can you help them create new cues? And you have to repeat those over and over again. So you're really going to have to embed those new cues. I think train them under as much pressure as you can, because in the real workplace, we're often doing things, the decisions we make are under pressure. So how much pressure can you add to the training that you're doing, so that we talk about creating a safe environment, but you almost want to recreate a not quite so safe environment. You want to put people under enough pressure that they learn that, under this circumstance, this is the behavior I have to use.
Yeah, and I think for me, actually, my reality is often it's those pressure moments when you revert back to the original pathway. That's stress-inducing. So that's really interesting, which for me brings the whole thing about workplace-based learning is so important. You've got to do it in the context where you're feeling the stress. Yeah.
Yes, and I think make it really clear to people that, this is a learning process, that, learning, as we say so regularly, it doesn't happen with a magic wand. It's a learning process. If you get it wrong, it doesn't matter. That's part of the process. Just rethink for yourself, okay, what do I do next time? Are there other triggers I could switch out for this? Can I talk to my manager and say, look, when this happens, that's not helping me. Can I invite you to help me on this as well? Talk to your peers, get regular feedback from your peers, from, even if you're a leader, from your teams, from your manager. It's about getting as many messages as you can that say this new behavior, this new way of thinking, this new pattern is the right way, and not to beat people up if they don't get it right the first time, because they won't.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So just to kind of round off, I presented this as this concept of unlearning, which we're hearing quite a lot in learning and development. So if we can't truly unlearn, what would be your suggestion for the phrase which we should probably be using as practitioners around this kind of change process?
I think you can talk about mastering, reframing, building upon. So helping people realize that, they're not completely, they don't have to get rid of everything they've already learned. Mostly we can build on what we already learned. So maybe it's about, moving from foundational to more sophisticated levels of learning, something like that.
Yeah.
And make people feel good about it.
Yeah, because this can be challenging for us when new things come. Stella, that's brilliant. As ever, time escapes us so quickly, but thanks for helping us to understand some of the genuine principles around how the brain works on this. And I guess the challenge for all of us listening in is what we need to unlearn. So thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy.
So in thinking about unlearning, Stella has given us some important perspectives. We need to look to support stronger pathways for knowledge and skills, which are more likely to be initiated than previous ones. We need to think about environmental triggers and cues. What's going on in the workplace that reinforces change? And we need to remember the importance of manager and peer support and feedback in the change process. And we need to design learning interventions in the context of where the knowledge or skill is to be used, and rewiring requires ongoing sustained practice and pressure. And getting it wrong is all part of the change process. So a challenge, in your context, what belief or best practice should be up for review? If this episode has sparked your thinking, share it with a colleague, continue the conversation with your team, and explore the research in the show notes. Thank you for joining us on The Learning Lens.
Well, that's the end of the show, the end of another month, moving fast into May. What did you enjoy about this month's show, Kate?
I enjoyed the variety of guests, actually, but thinking about, what Rob and Joe were talking about in terms of that performance and the impact. It's the perennial nut, that we're trying to crack across, organizational learning. But then also thinking about that individual right the way through, sort of almost down the pyramid, down to the individual end of the stick, which is, what Alex is trying to, shake up really and disrupt with his startup at Rumbo. So I just think there's that whole spectrum, and it's still such an opportunity, even with AI in the mix, for us to, us as a profession, as learning professionals, there's so many opportunities to make that impact and have that impact. And it just makes me hope that we can harness these tools to, do some of the legwork and focus on the more strategic and more exciting and more interesting components.
It's a big trend, Kate. I think you notice now that we spend far less time talking about developing content and putting on lots of courses and selecting courses and all of that stuff, and far more on the bigger picture. What does the organization actually need to deliver its ends? And a lot of that has nothing to do with courses. It's environments, experience, and all of those things. And that's reflected widely now in the people who we talk to, and generally I think out there in that interesting world. And we'll see what happens at Learning Technologies, which is very, very soon now. Whether it's reflected both in the conference and the exhibition. It seems to be reflected in the conference, but not so much in the exhibitors. We'll see who's there. So, Kate, I think that's been a really good show. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to tell you a few things that are on. We've got AITD in Brisbane, Australia. That's on in May, 13th to the 15th of May in Brisbane. Kate, with all your air miles, you could probably travel free first class out there if you felt like it. And the ATD conference is in Los Angeles this year. They turn up at Los Angeles every 5 or 6 years, and it's always a bigger event than normal. So if you feel like being in Los Angeles on the 17th and 20th of May, you could go from Brisbane, fly across to LA from Sydney, easy, on the 17th and 20th of May. And then later on on the 18th to 24th, there's the Learning at Work Week and their campaign for learning. Lots of always interesting stuff popping out of Learning at Work Week.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from people if you're doing anything for Learning at Work Week as well. We'd love to showcase that and hear about what you're up to.
We would, and it's always about what small groups are doing in small companies and big companies all over the place. It's not a kind of focus. The focus is on different, wide, distributed opportunities. So it's a good thing that it's surviving, I think. On the 21st of May, Learning Live. Guess what, Kate? An AI edition in London with the LPI, sponsored by Microsoft. And then in June, already in June, it's the CIPD Festival of Work at Excel on the 10th to the 11th of June. So that's quite a lot of things to get your teeth into over the next couple of months. And we'll be back, certainly, on the 28th of May. So we'll see you then.
Thanks, Nigel. See you then.